Here's an odd question for you. Are you an ape? Yeah, that's what I thought. Would you believe me if I told you that biologically we're no better than a raccoon or a cat or even a chicken? Now, most people when they hear this think, well, there's an obvious difference between us and them. We're the only living creatures with a consciousness and self awareness. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the sequence that make up our DNA and evolution by natural selection. We're talking about the Charles Darwin legacy. Darwin was born into a properly structured family on February 12, 1809. At school in Shrewsbury, England, Charles was taught that all living creatures had a unique place in God's kingdom, each made by God according to his perfect, unchanging design, just a little over 6,000 years ago. His father hoped he would follow in his footsteps and become a medical doctor, but the adolescent Charles was contemplating an easy life, spending his time delving into the science of nature and collecting beetles. At the ripe age of 22, Darwin's family connection got him a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a round-the-world voyage on the HMS Beagle. The voyage lasted 5 years, and over the course of the trip, he collected thousands of specimens, including birds and plants. The voyage led him to the Galapagos Island in Ecuador, where he saw different types of the same animal. He began to wonder why God had created different types of iguanas, finches, tortoises, and rheas on more or less the same island. Were they cousins? Related by some ancestor dating back thousands of years? Once he discovered fossils on the island, he started putting the pieces together. Noticing the fossils resembled giant versions of the animals we have today, Darwin's curiosity took over. What were these animals? When have they lived? And why don't they exist anymore? Putting aside what he was taught, Darwin started to question how old these fossils really were, and began to realize the Earth and the fossils he was discovering had to be more than 6,000 years old. During the voyage, Darwin started reading the work of Charles Lyell. Lyell claimed in his book, Principles of Geology, that the land on which we stand today was formed and shaped by many factors over millions of years. This is when Darwin started to ask himself, if the Earth was shaped over millions of years, can life change as well? When Darwin got back to London, he would send mail to thousands of scientists all over the world for data, theories, and asking questions from the collective minds of the greatest naturalists of his time. He noticed how the data showed all kinds of animals within the same species had the same type of bones, just reshaped and resized to fit the different environments and living conditions for those particular animals of that particular region. Darwin started to backtrack to early embryo development in very different types of animals: birds, fish, humans, and lizards. Increasingly, he became convinced that every living thing must be related to every other. He started to see life as a tree, with species as branches rather than separate bushes of life. Millions of years ago, life began at the trunk of this tree, and as time went by, conditions changed, forcing offsprings to adapt to the new environment. Our ancestors evolved, split off, and multiplied along branches, and now every species on the planet is a twig at the end of the branch. From single cells to multicellular life, which was achieved from small steps over a very long period of time. Darwin liked to test his ideas, even if that meant getting down and dirty. No, not that kind of down and dirty. He had a collection of pigeons and other types of birds, all of which he compared and tested and evaluated. Back in the 1850s, breeders would breed different kinds of pigeons, and that fascinated Darwin. He saw that as humans, building a business around evolution, using evolution, manipulating it, sort of toying with it to see what kind of results they got. This helped him prove that nothing is static in the world, and that living creatures do change. In his 40s, Darwin became obsessed with pigeons. He was always with his head in books on breeding and attended dozens of pigeon shows. The comparison between the breeding business and nature acting on wildlife was astounding. We've all seen this many times over. If you've ever been to a pet shop, you know what I'm talking about. This helped Darwin understand how nature selected which animals to breed, which ones to leave the way they were at a particular moment in time, and which ones were going to go extinct due to their inefficiency to survive in certain conditions. But the question still remained, why? Why did nature prefer some mutations over others? The answer to that question is somewhat contradictory to the question itself. The thing is, nature doesn't do things for any particular reason. It just does them. If nature had a grand plan for all of life, that would imply that nature was making a conscious decision to force animals to behave a certain way. Truth is, the world runs the way it always has, always adapting, always evolving. Nothing is static and nothing really matters. If you can't adapt to the new circumstances, you'll just die out, and maybe a new breed of humans will emerge, one that can survive. Thing is, no one really knows, and no one will ever know. This is the cold, hard truth Darwin faced. He lied awake for nights at times, at the thought and hope that life wasn't the survival of the fittest. But it was, it is, and it always will be. If you adapt, you'll live to fight another day. And you're more likely to reproduce, which means your species has a greater chance at survival. The race is survival. The finish line is reproduction. When breeds split off for generations and develop in their own environment, it's possible for the new breed to specialize to such an extent that they can no longer breed with their ancestral group. At that point, they're classified as a distant species. This is the origin of species. Doubts lingered in Darwin's mind for a while, but after over 20 years of research, Darwin published his book on the origin of species, which made headlines and got massive controversy from every religious group. The origins turned our world upside down, but still, there was one big gap in Darwin's understanding. What Darwin couldn't crack was how evolution was preserved from generation to generation. After almost 100 years from the publication of The Origin, near what is called a Darwinian revolution, scientists were able to combine evolution with genetics. Genes are the long string of code, instructions to the cells that build all living things. Scientists now realize that genes from the parents don't blend as they were thought to, but instead, during reproduction, are inherited entirely or not at all. When animals reproduce, their genes are copied and placed into sperm and eggs. During that copying process, occasionally, there's a random mistake. These mistakes are mutations, which give rise to new characteristics on which Darwinian natural selection then adds. And what's more, genes can be compared with pinpoint precision. The genes in every cell, in every living thing, are made up of DNA, a code made of the same four chemicals, known as A, T, C, G, which modern technology can analyze. Whether the animal is a mouse, a deer, an ape, or a human simply depend on the order of the letters in the code. And just as Darwin thought, animals more closely related by evolution have more similarities in their genetic code than more distantly related animals. Unfortunately, Darwin didn't live long enough to see how his theory would change the world, or learn about the discovery of DNA. Every living thing carries inside every one of its cells an instruction book for making that animal or its children. A simple yet astounding theory, evolution by natural selection, has proved that mankind is no different than any other creature that has ever lived. We're all made from the same genetic code, A, T, C, G, and we're built to evolve with the times. Many people thought that we were above every animal, that we somehow were made to dominate every animal. Truth is, we are animals. Charles Darwin might be long gone, but his legacy will live on forever, for generations to come, and for whatever evolvement we undergo.